July 20th, 2021. For the first time, Blue Origin, the company founded by Amazon's Jeff Bezos, is sending space tourists into low Earth orbit. Bezos himself is on board.
This is incredible.
Oh, I love it! I love it!
The private flight lasts only around 10 minutes and reaches a height of 66 miles, just enough to feel the weightlessness of space. 9 days earlier, British billionaire Richard Branson's space company, Virgin Galactic, accomplished a similar feat. These are the first commercial tourist flights to the fringes of the Earth's atmosphere. They are the beginning of the commercial conquest of space.
I think it's awesome, honestly. We're pushing towards this goal of the commercialization of low Earth orbit.
It's about much more than space tourism. A potential gold rush is emerging, one that promises to last for decades to come.
We're going to be surrounded by objects that we can't imagine how we live without, and then it's a trillion-dollar industry.
It's not only companies. States are also fighting for the lead in space again.
There are some states that are very secretive about what they're doing, so I think there's always going to be a tension.
It's a new space race. Who will conquer the final frontier?
20 years from now, we're going to look back and say, wow, that was really the turning point in space exploration.
The year is 2028. A private lander has just entered an area in the south polar region of the Moon and has dropped several rovers there. They map the area, take samples, and analyze them. They are scouts on an advanced mission. In a few months, astronauts from NASA, the European Space Agency, and private companies will follow. We're not there yet, but this scenario comes very close to what the next decade envisions.
My name is Armin Wedler, and I'm from the German Aerospace Center. And here we are on our ARCS demonstration mission.
Armin Wedler is one of more than 50 international scientists working on the volcanic slopes of Mount Etna in Sicily.
Basically, we're showing how we can use robots to maybe support the next colonization, a permanent base on the moon, and how we can carry out scientific exploration tasks. This here is our base camp, based out of our 4 22-feet containers. We have 3 control rooms and a living room center. Up ahead, we have our communications container first. Colleagues are still in the process of trimming out a few parameters here.
The DLR, the German Space Agency, has sent them here to plan and prepare for their country's future in space.
Down there you can see the exploration camp, where we carry out the mission. There we have a lander. That's about 820 feet, about 230 feet in altitude. We have to walk that at 8,500 feet. Our colleagues are always panting when they go up and down.
Volcanic rock is new Earth, untouched by the erosive forces of our weather. The closest thing we have to the surface of another planet.
Mount Etna is perfect for Mars and Moon test missions. It is particularly important for us that we have this fine granular dust, this abrasive material. So our technical systems are really exposed to these environments and have to withstand them. Our scenario here is that we landed on the surface of the planet with the lander. That's why we really only have a basic observation control center here.
The team has already spent weeks here, testing the rover's ability to work in the dusty conditions. They are planning to map and explore a 2.7 million square foot area of Etna's surface.
Now, let's go very briefly to our Operation 1 mission. This is our colleague Rio here, who's basically facing a mission scenario. Here we are in the process of selecting a stone. We can see the created map, a three-dimensional model that our robots have built.
In order to land people on other planets one day, scientific missions like this one must be successful. This is just the latest in over 6 decades worth of state-run space missions. July 20th, 1969. 650 million people around the world hold their breath. The climax of an unprecedented race is approaching. Who will be the first to put a man on the moon? At exactly 8:17 p.m. local time, the United States wins the race.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It was and still is the high point of space travel. Only a few years later, in 1972, NASA stopped its manned flights to the Earth satellite because they were too expensive to continue. Another historic date, Saturday, May 30th, 2020 at 3:22 p.m. The U.S. astronauts Bob Behnken and Douglas Hurley start their way to the International Space Station from the American spaceport at Cape Canaveral. This mission is special. For the first time in history of space travel, the capsule that transports the two was not developed and built by a state space agency, but by a private company. It is the starting gun for the commercial conquest of space and a new era for state programs like NASA.
My name is Phil McAllister, and I'm the Director of Commercial Space at NASA headquarters. Right now, what we're seeing is in space, there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity, but nobody's exactly sure what's going to be the real moneymaker. Obviously, we are seeing transportation. We're seeing people make money at that. But then when they get into space, what can they do? What are things that are really going to make money? And I don't think anybody knows for certain what that's going to be.
The fact is, space business is booming. According to the German newspaper Handelsblatt, the global market volume in space business will double to $805 billion by 2030. The demand for commercial services alone is going to quadruple over the same period. Only a quarter of these new sales are attributable to state space projects. 3/4 are to the private sector.
It's new for NASA, certainly. It used to be that all the hardware, including the capsules, was owned and operated by NASA, right? We made all the decisions, we owned the hardware. Today, we're not seeing that, right? We're seeing these commercial companies, and we're just buying a ride.
Liftoff of the Falcon 9.
In just a few years, SpaceX has become an important supplier of the International Space Station. Since 2017, it has launched more satellites than anyone else.
This transportation capability, it's just their first step to doing more and bolder things. So I think the companies that are offering this capability today, Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, SpaceX, this is just the first step to a larger, grander vision of what they want to accomplish.
One of these visions is to make Mars a place people can live on. It's driven by the controversial billionaire and SpaceX owner, Elon Musk.
There are really two fundamental paths. History is going to bifurcate along two directions. One path is we stay on Earth forever, and then there will be some eventual extinction event. I don't have an immediate doomsday prophecy, but it's eventually, history suggests there will be some doomsday event. The alternative is to become a spacefaring civilization and a multi-planet species, which I hope you would agree that is the right way to go.
Elon Musk's plans are actually quite concrete. For him, saving humanity begins with a trip to Mars. SpaceX wants to start manned flights to Mars within this decade and build human settlements there.
He's right. From a geophysical point of view, it's only a matter of time before the next major catastrophe hits Earth.
But the most important question in Musk's vision remains unanswered. How is this supposed to work in practice?
My name is Christiane Heinecke. I'm a research associate at the Center for Applied Space Technology and Microgravity. My research focus is habitation, so the question of how to survive on the Moon, Mars, or other celestial bodies.
Christiane Heinecke has already spent 366 days on Mars. Not the real one, of course, but a simulation, about halfway up the volcano Mauna Loa in Hawaii. There, she was locked in a habitat with 5 other scientists from different countries as part of NASA's High Seas experiment. Communication with the outside world was only possible by email, and as on the real Mars, time delayed. Trips outside had to be extensively planned and required a spacesuit. But even this just scratched the surface of what an attempt to live on Mars would truly require.
This habitat was primarily about psychological studies. It looks very nice. It's exactly what you might imagine a Martian habitat to look like. However, this habitat is technically not implemented realistically. If you really want to fly to Mars, then you need a habitat that would really work.
Together with architects, engineers, and psychologists, Heinecke is working on her own version of the ideal space habitat, the Moon and Mars base analog, MAMBA for short. This is what it should look like one day.
MAMBA consists of a total of 6 modules, upright cylinders that are arranged in 2 rows. This is the heart of the station, the laboratory module. On the side, we have the workshop, because things will definitely break. And here, the greenhouse. In the second row, you have the living modules, also upright cylinders. They are connected to each other. Here you have a module for sleeping, here you have a kitchen module, and here you have the leisure module. You also have 2 airlocks on the sides. 2 for the simple reason, if one breaks down, the crew still has to be able to get out. And finally, the entire habitat is under a big dome made of moon rocks, the regolith. It's important to protect the habitat from cosmic radiation.
MAMBA's development is only just beginning. Basic questions remain. How will the life support system work? How can they design surfaces and devices so that they can be operated by anyone? What is the ideal ceiling height? Christiane and her team built a wooden mock-up of the lab module to test these questions.
MAMBA is a habitat concept designed to make it possible to go to the moon and survive in there. But Mamba should also make people feel comfortable inside the habitat. In fact, we are the only ones dealing with this question, and in particular, to set it up and test it.
It will be another 20 years before a station like Mamba can be built in space. But Christiana's work could have more immediate benefits for our current home.
What we need to survive on Mars are also things that we can use here on Earth. A system that cleans the air or a system that cleans the water. If we learn a little from Mars, then we can also live sustainably here on Earth.
Still, the journey to Mars may be further away than Elon Musk would have us believe.
If we want to go to Mars, we have to learn how to work in an environment that is very unfriendly, where we literally have to bring our own atmosphere, our own resources. And the best way that we could actually understand how to work in that environment is to work in a nearby environment that's not that different. And that happens to be the lunar surface.
I am convinced that it makes sense to first test technologies on the moon, and also to use the moon to gain further knowledge for us, for humanity, but also to use it as a springboard for travel into deeper galaxies.
Before we can go to Mars, we must go back to the moon. It is the next target of all major space agencies. A repeat of Apollo's famous landing is imminent. The reason is simple: distance. The moon is almost 240,000 miles away. That's almost 30 times the diameter of the Earth. Mars, on the other hand, is between 34 and 248 million miles away, depending on the orbit. The one-way trip to the red planet would take 6 months at best. For this reason alone, Luna is, from a purely relative point of view, cheap. The journey takes only 3 days and consumes a fraction of the fuel. Establishing a shuttle service between Earth and the moon is also relatively simple. So while the red planet may be the ultimate goal, the state agency's current work mostly focuses on the moon. Like the DLR's Arches mission on Mount Etna, today they are testing the rover prototype LRU-2. It's supposed to explore unknown and difficult terrain.
Etna is to test the technology. The goal is to contribute to real space missions. And of course, that such an autonomous system can support the astronauts on site.
The rover independently navigates through the terrain, identifies objects of interest, and takes samples.
Just give 1 centimeter more and let's try again.
One task is particularly tricky. LRU-2 is to use a laser module to analyze the exact composition of stones, but the team has yet to deploy it successfully.
If it doesn't work and the arm crashes into the camera or something, you have to start all over again.
Yeah, it's placed. Looks good.
Okay, cool.
Ah, yeah, it's moving back.
Yes.
From the shutdown. Yeah.
But suddenly, another failure. It's the essence of science.
Yeah. Okay.
Some days work, some days don't.
You stand down there all day and wait for something to work, and then you're finally on the verge of it working, then there's some kind of error again, and it starts all over again. That's kind of a bit demotivating. Standing here, waiting, something goes wrong, but Step by step.
Step by step.
Missions like this cost millions of dollars and don't necessarily have a direct financial benefit. A risk private companies would never take.
Without these technologies, without this development that we are showing here, these commercial ventures would not be able to exist at all. They are based on this knowledge advantage. And you often see that these people develop and go into such commercial institutes.
SpaceX may send rockets to space, but state agencies are still building their high-tech cargo. 2021 was a record year for government spending on space programs, and it's only going to get bigger. The American government spent almost $55 billion US. The European Union, $6.5 billion. Russia and Japan around $4 billion. And China is increasingly appearing on the scene as a major American competitor. It strives to be the new big player in the great game of space powers. A Chinese rover has already examined the far side of the moon and brought samples back to Earth. Another rover has reached Mars and has been sending back selfies and sound files ever since. The Chinese are also building their own space station.
The reasons for this space station are simple. First, our space technology has reached this level. And second, we are going to build a strong aerospace country. Therefore, we should develop our manned spaceflight abilities to go from near Earth to deeper, further space for the better, peaceful use of space.
Parts of the Chinese space station are already in orbit. The first taikonauts are already visiting it.
Every step forward we take represents the bravery and perseverance in humankind's unceasing efforts in space exploration, and it will contribute to the peaceful use of space with the wisdom and strength of the Chinese people.
Their next goal, a permanent station on the moon. In March 2021, the Russian space agency Roscosmos signed a joint declaration of intent to build the base together. It is clear the race to the moon has begun again.
Yeah, there might be a little bit of a race, right? Who is going to establish the values and the framework of how we're going to operate in space? I think we would like those values to reflect our current values here in the United States, and to be able to do that, you need to be able to be out there.
There are some states that share knowledge openly. There are other states that are very, very secretive about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and the results. So I think there's always going to be a tension between these two.
That worries me a lot, and I think we as Europeans must be able to act. Otherwise, the train will pass us here.
But why do humans strive for space at all? The only ones who can really tell us are the just over 600 men and women who have already experienced it.
My name is Kayla Barron. I'm an active duty naval officer, a submarine warfare officer, and a NASA astronaut.
Kayla Barron was the 601st human in space. She spent 176 days on the International Space Station.
It's incredible. It's actually pretty hard to describe. There's just so many exciting moments, whether that's launch, re-entry, spacewalks, robotic operations, science campaigns. It's a humbling experience and a huge privilege to be a part of the team. When I first floated into the space station, I think I was just overwhelmed by the visual experience because we use every surface, but the space station is just packed with stuff, computers, cables. It took a while for my brain to understand, what was useful information that I needed to pay attention to and what was sort of the background visual clutter. But it kind of gives you a sense of how big the structure is. These are the modules that we actually are living and working inside. So when you see video from us inside, we're inside these pressurized modules. But then you can also see the unpressurized section of the space station, this huge truss that primarily supports the solar arrays and our radiators. So that's how we get power and get rid of heat. But it's big. And I think you especially get an appreciation for that when you go outside to work on it.
Kayla Barron experienced just that, twice. Almost 7 hours each. Only a 3mm spacesuit separated her from the universe.
When you look out the window, these views are incredible, but you're looking out a window. And there's something about being in a spacesuit that's really cool because when you look out your visor, there's nothing in your peripheral vision. And so you really are like, I'm out in the vacuum of space in this tiny spacesuit on this tiny thing on this giant space station, just zooming around the planet. When you look up and take in those incredible views, it just takes your breath away.
Viewing Earth from this unique position, many astronauts describe the experience as transformative.
Seeing the planet from that perspective changes everybody. The first time I looked at the Earth, seeing it as this interconnected organisms with all of these different ecosystems, all of these different species living all over the planet, I think it really made me, as an individual human being, feel like I was a steward of the planet. You just feel really amazed that Earth even exists and that we get to exist on it. I think going to space really sparks this childlike wonder. You discover the world all over again, living in this unique environment, floating around, getting to play with water in space. I think we all felt like kids a lot of the time. When you get to space, you have to learn how to move around again, how to go to the bathroom, how to eat, how to get water, like all of these things that we take for granted in our day-to-day adult lives down here. You have to relearn up there. So yeah, definitely made me feel like a kid again in a lot of ways.
It's an experience that private space companies would like to offer many more people for a price.
I think we're going to see the number of people that are flying into space significantly increase in the next few years, and all sorts of new and exciting markets that are going to be created because of that. And the one that I'm most excited about is commercial space destinations or commercial space stations. That's what I'm working on right now. We're hoping to have commercial destinations in orbit by the latter part of this decade so that we can transition away from the International Space Station.
The International Space Station has been hovering around 250 miles above the Earth for over 20 years. Its end is planned for this decade, though the exact date is not yet fixed. One plan for life in space after the ISS can already be found in Houston, Texas.
I'm Matt Ondler. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Axiom Space. Axiom Space's primary business model is to build the first commercial space station, which is incredibly complicated.
But the basic idea is simple: build off the ISS. Gradually, Axiom will have 4 of its modules dock onto it and transform it into a new space station.
It is more of its own station, but we're able to leverage certain resources on the ISS. For example, we'll get power from the ISS early, so it makes it easier to build a space station when you're building it off of the ISS. It's like going camping, but you got running water and electricity. This is our entire station. The first two modules, plus the third module, which is dedicated to research and manufacturing, and then the power thermal module. The Earth Observatory. These are the largest space windows ever attempted. They're about 2 meters by 1 meter. That's where all the Instagram pictures will be taken, is from the Earth Observatory.
The venture is not entirely private. NASA is supporting the project with a $140 million investment. The end result will look like a very chic space hotel.
Here's a mock-up of our crew quarters. So this is where the astronaut will sleep, get some private time. They have a window that looks at the Earth, which will be pretty amazing. And then, of course, they have a infotainment center where they can monitor the station. Important to be able to kind of get away from the rest of the crew every once in a while. I always say the inside of the International Space Station looks like a crazy person's garage. There's just stuff everywhere. And some of that is because it's evolved over many years and it wasn't always planned to be how it is now. We're a little beyond that, where we're leveraging a lot of experience from the ISS. So we will be able to build our commercial space station for 1/100th the cost of what it took to build the ISS. We're not trying to solve science problems. We're not trying to solve technology problems. It's really an engineering problem. And so when you're solving engineering problems, it's a lot less costly to do than if you're trying to break through on some fundamental physics. And so this is a flight computer. It allows us to guarantee delivery of data. So when we require a thruster on both sides of the station to fire, they fire exactly the same time. We can guarantee the delivery of that command. So in comparison, that particular capability on the ISS is a $1 million custom box. We're going to build a flight computer for $15,000. This idea of rapid prototyping is really what we're doing across the company and is one of the ways that I think new space is very, very different than old space. So this is our one of our design and manufacturing areas. This is a full-scale mock-up of the aisleway of one module. So this gives you a feel for the size of one module, but it shows you that it's not a huge space. But this is just the aisleway, so the outer module, the cylinder is much larger than this, about 5 meters across.
Axiom Space has already demonstrated how the future mission to its own space station will work. In April 2022, it sent 3 investors and former NASA astronaut Michael Lopez Alegria to the ISS. Estimated price for a single ticket, $55 million. The private astronauts brought with them a whole series of experiments that might never have found their way into space through the official route. But this did produce some tension between the ISS astronauts and the private astronauts.
There's been moments that surprised me. We later gave our feedback that I'd say some things should be modified for such private missions. They could only carry out their experiments with our help. We sacrificed our working hours to ensure their experiments.
There was a lot of learning and figuring things out on both sides and a long process. We're seeing a lot more countries interested in flying country astronauts. So I think our station will be filled with a mix of country astronauts. There might be astronauts from particular companies. And then we hope, too, that we're the place where NASA sends its astronauts to do work, too.
If you look historically, since the beginning of the space age, probably about 500 people have flown to space. About 95% of them have been government employees. I think going forward, it's going to be an order of magnitude more, like 5,000, and the vast majority of them are going to be private citizens as opposed to government employees. And this is the start of that right now. In 20 years, we're going to look back historically at this time that you and I are living in right now and said, yeah, that was the turning point. That's when things really started to change.
If you're a hammer, you tend to see everything as a nail. You know, if you're working in the commercial sector, you see everything as a profit line. And I think that if that sensibility of space exploration as a business endeavor becomes the dominant theme rather than scientific exploration, then I think we have problems.
Missions to Mars and private space stations catch the eye. But the primary current business of new space is much less glamorous, placing satellites in space. The largest projects are called Starlink and OneWeb and are intended to change the Earth with cheap satellite internet. Or Europe's satellite navigation system, Galileo. It constantly circles the Earth and always lets users know their exact position. Around 5,700 active satellites like this one are currently orbiting the Earth. Twice that number have already had their day and are now space junk. The American Industry Association estimates that almost 3/4 of the revenue in the space sector is related to the satellite industry. And these sales already come almost exclusively from private companies.
We're seeing a slight change in the dynamics, but communications is clearly the big economic driver for space. I think next on the horizon, we've seen a lot of remote sensing companies. These are companies that send cameras and other sensing equipment into space, look down on the Earth, and for a whole bunch of different applications, whether it be farming or mining or weather.
The basic rocket propulsion technology that transports this new business into space has hardly changed since the middle of the 20th century. There are two types, solid fuel rockets and liquid rockets. In the former, the fuel is present as a solid mass in the engine. In liquid engines, it's a liquid stored outside the engine. Once ignited, a solid fuel rocket's reaction cannot be interrupted. Basically like a firework. In the liquid engine, on the other hand, the chemical components are carried in separate tanks and pumped from there into the actual engine. This enables thrust regulation so that the drive can be controlled during flight. A combination of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen produces the greatest performance. The legendary Space Shuttle combined solid and liquid propulsion. The two white solid rocket boosters on the edge were responsible for the main part of the starting thrust. Once in the air, they detached and the onward flight was taken over by liquid propulsion. The catch? Liquid engines are more expensive, more complex, and therefore more prone to errors than solid fuel rockets. And for decades, rocket engines like these were single use.
It's like taking an airplane, a 737, and flying it from New York to California one time and then dropping it in the ocean. It makes no economic sense. Nobody would be able to afford a plane ticket if you did that every single time. But that's what we were doing in the space industry. We knew it wasn't the best way, and we knew eventually reusability was going to make a big impact.
For private companies to succeed, they had to find a way to make liquid engine rockets reusable. In 2015, one did. SpaceX.
What SpaceX was able to do was get reusability to the point where they could quickly and easily and cost-effectively turn around their hardware and fly it again. And that brought the cost down dramatically.
The modern rockets from SpaceX, or also Blue Origin, now fully rely on reusability. They simply return to Earth after takeoff, ready to launch again another day. This is the future of space travel, because if the expensive propulsion technology can be reused, flying into space will be cheaper. It is innovations like these that make the commercial conquest of space possible in the first place. The cost per pound to transport freight in low Earth orbit has been drastically reduced. With the American Saturn V rocket, the rocket that took the first humans to the moon, the transport cost about $2,500 per pound, adjusted for inflation. With the successor, the Space Shuttle, the costs exploded to more than $29,000 per pound. The Russian Soyuz rocket, which has been launched since the 1970s, costs an average of more than $8,000 after adjusting for inflation. The European Ariane 5, around $4,500. The Chinese Long March 5, around $3,500. SpaceX's Falcon Heavy is currently launching for just $680 per pound, a fraction of the original cost.
That has been a major accomplishment that has shown that the private sector is mature enough to take on some of the challenges of going into space, working in space, and actually turning a profit from it. I think the profit motive is a big incentive for progressing faster, deeper into space. And I'm glad that they have finally taken interest in this.
I've flown with a private operator myself with SpaceX and a recycled rocket, and it was a good feeling for me to know that this rocket is reused and doesn't become space junk. Afterwards, my colleague Samantha Cristoforetti came to the space station in exactly the same physical rocket that I went up in. This is the right way.
It has been a major step forward for commercial space companies. However, the foundation for this progress is still laid primarily by state agencies such as NASA, ESA, or DLR. And here on Mount Etna, you can see a good example of this. This is the research drone Ardea.
This is Ardea. You can see that it has a total of 4 cameras, each forming 2 stereo pairs. And with that, it can perceive depth. It flies only with its camera systems and with an IMU. IMU is accelerometers, gyroscopes. It's sort of like the inner ear in humans. This means that we can do planetary exploration with Ardea on the surface, but also fly into lava caves and other caves to explore there as well.
Marcus Mueller and his team of up to 7 people have been working on the technology for more than 10 years. They spent countless hours in its development and haven't made any revenue, an expense only a state agency can afford.
In principle, this is the brain of Ardea. It contains all the computing components in the cameras. And here we have the propulsion system, the drive system of Ardea, where, for example, the rotors are still on it. On the moon, we wouldn't have any air. That means we would need a different propulsion system. Then we would use jets.
A system like Ardea works without GPS, using only its own measuring sensors. The goal is to independently navigate over foreign planets and map their surface. A few days ago, the drone rose and began to study Etna in its first successful test flights. But what worked well in the beginning is now causing difficulties. For days, the team has been trying to get the drone to fly again. So far, they've had no luck.
The problem is, we see slight anomalies. At the moment, the copter goes slightly into the pitch. It almost makes a 50-degree pitch turn, and then crashes.
The reason is simple. The wind is just too strong today.
The wind speeds are well over 22 miles per hour on average, and the gusts are well over 67 miles per hour. I'm afraid the system is simply not designed for these conditions.
The researchers currently have no choice but to take their measurements from the ground, a frustrating compromise. But this is science. The road is long and the effort is great, and the gains are not measured in profits and loss.
Basically, we're in the process of exploring and advancing technologies here. We are pursuing the vision that we can achieve more with different types of robots than with one system. So we believe that with different skills, like in our people, the engineers, the scientists, the technicians, We can solve tasks better together than a generalist.
Eben die Aufgabe besser lösen als ein Generalist.
Many technologies like these are still being tested for the complex space missions of the future, but others are already thinking a big step ahead.
My name is Matthias Link. I am director at the Luxembourg Space Agency, LSA, and I've been taking care of the development of the space sector here in Luxembourg for many years.
Little Luxembourg, with a population of just 640,000, is a driving force behind the latest trend in the space business, so-called space mining.
In principle, all resources exist in space. Anything you can find down here on Earth, you can find in space. So if people expand in the solar system, on the moon, later on Mars, maybe at some point further, it makes sense that they can use these resources.
Possible targets include meteorites containing platinum and gold, or the moon. It contains precious rare earth metals, but also water and ice that can be used to obtain fuel and breathing air for anyone living there. Or so-called M-asteroids. They consist of raw materials that could be used as building material for future space projects. In contrast to Earth, the resources in space seem infinite.
Most of the science fiction stories I read in high school and middle school were all about, families that bought their own rocket and went up to the asteroid belt and mined and, did stuff like that. I think it's kind of cool, but the problem is that it's not like those resources are going to come back to the Earth.
That sounds like science fiction at first. All this will take place on a relatively small scale, let's say within the next 10 years. Little by little, this will continue, and in the coming decades, new markets will emerge.
The business of finding space resources could be a big part of our economic future. In 2017, Luxembourg became just the second country, after the USA, to legalize the mining of raw materials in space.
Space does not belong to anyone. Where it becomes unclear is what about the space resources? If you now fly to the moon and take a piece of rock and process it, or you dig for water and use this water, then it starts to get complicated. In other words, we definitely need an international framework that can efficiently accompany this technical development and is gradually adapted. At the same time, however, it's very clear that a single Luxembourg law cannot be the solution.
The vision of mining raw materials in space seems surreal, but Luxembourg is not the only country pursuing it. NASA is planning to launch its Psyche space probe to the asteroid of the same name, which circles the Sun on an orbit between Mars and Jupiter. Its objective is to explore the raw materials that may be found there. The European Space Agency is also in the business. It launched the Space Resources Challenge in 2022 with the aim of exploring and extracting raw materials from the moon in the near future.
So that's like a joystick, so you click on it with the mouse.
A potential gold rush is imminent, and nobody wants to miss out.
Europe is a leader in space travel, in the field of satellites, Earth observation, but also navigation. In the field of exploration and astronautics, we are always just the small partner of NASA. But I think Europe needs to be bolder. We shouldn't let this new space development that we're seeing in the US pass us by. And then Europe can also be in the top of the league.
It's a rover that is designed exactly to explore the southern region of the moon, and is going to look for traces of water or other interesting elements.
Private companies around the world are eager to keep up with American giants like SpaceX and Blue Origin.
Space Application Service is an SME from Belgium. It's a very international company, and we try also to cover many aspects related to flight.
This is EuroHub. It's essentially a habitat designed to land on the surface of the moon. There it opens up, a bit like a flower, and inflates. We don't want to sell it. We want to offer it as a service. The whole space sector is in complete upheaval. See what's happening in the US right now. This is fantastic. Why shouldn't new space also work in Europe?
We're a Canadian company, and we develop software to operate and automate robots in space. So what you're seeing right now actually is a live feed from Ottawa, Canada, of our rover based in a lunar facility. You could control the rover manually. Right now, there's no time delay, so it's relatively straightforward to drive it right now. So when I chose a career in space and space robotics, I had to do a PhD, and I assumed I would either work in academia or a space agency, which was great. One thing led to another, and suddenly you have this commercial space and new space.
Even things like gold, mining gold on an asteroid and bringing it down to the Earth, the price per gram of gold would go up a factor of 100 to amortize the cost of you going up there, setting up a mining endeavor, and then bringing the stuff back. So it's not like you're going to get cheap gold down on the Earth. But so long as you keep that gold in space to be part of colonies that you're setting up on the Moon and Mars, then that's fine.
It's not about finding a golden asteroid and bring that gold back to Earth. It's about finding normal resources, in quotes. We are convinced that in addition to further exploration, an entire space economy will emerge that goes far beyond what we have today.
The commercial conquest of space has already begun. What significance will this have for people on Earth? What problems will the increased human and technical presence off our planet cause? What opportunities will arise? What conflicts are ahead? Much of this is unclear today. The dream of space has been of limitless possibility. Now humanity is testing those limits as we conquer the final frontier.